Welcome to Calumet Perspectives. I'm Tom Roach. My guest today is Karen Fontaine. Karen has been teaching nursing for over 32 years in the Purdue system, and she has published 14 books on healthcare. And the book we're going to talk about today just came out in its 4th edition, and it is titled Complementary and Alternative Therapies. And the angle that we're going to take today is to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, what this is, but then also talk about how these alternative therapies have been handled in the news media and in the culture, and what kinds of problems that creates for people who might want to look at those as options, right? I guess maybe we could start by talking about what you have in here, what you're defining as these alternative therapies, and I know one of them was botanical healing. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, botanical healing would be the herbs, the use of herbs, the use of aromatherapy, and massage with it. So I kind of broke it down into different categories, manual healing, botanical healing, mind-body healing, like hypnosis, guided imagery.
Yeah. Okay, so aromatherapy, how does that work as a healing method?
Because if you use essential oils, which are parts of plants, they're equally as effective as taking herbs. So it's an herbal thing. If you use artificially, ones that you buy at a store with artificial, they only smell nice. Like may be good for romance, but it doesn't do anything for healing.
Right.
So you have to buy essential oils. And you might use them in a massage oil and it'll absorb through the skin. You might be breathing it in so that it actually creates changes in the body. Okay.
And then another one was manual healing.
Right. That would be things like chiropractic. I just blanked. I have to look at my thing. Yeah. Massage, acupressure, acupuncture.
Sure.
Those kinds of things.
Okay, and we're more familiar with those, I think.
Right.
And mind-body?
Mind-body or yoga, meditation, hypnotherapy, guided imagery.
And then spiritual was another one?
Spiritual, that would be what I've covered in this book. I've covered shamans and then the use of faith and prayer and healing. Okay,
good. Now, I know in my area, which is public relations and rhetorical theory, I'm familiar with what you might call a kind of public relations campaign that went on late 19th century that was, from my understanding, sponsored pretty much by people who were invested in the medical profession today, right?
Correct.
And that they demonized pretty much all of these other avenues for healthcare. Right. In particular, midwives and anyone that seemed to be competitive, essentially, right? Let's just take midwifery for a second here, right? What's the history of that, and how far back does that go?
For as long as time existed, midwives were doing the deliveries of all the babies. It wasn't until the turn of the last century that physicians started getting involved with that. In Europe, midwives still do all of the normal deliveries, and the only things that OBGYN physicians would be doing would be C-sections or complicated pregnancies.
Right.
In this country, we now have nurse midwives who have at least a master's degree in midwifery. There are lay midwives too, and those are the people who probably do more of the home deliveries.
Right.
Nurse midwives will either work in a hospital or in a nurse midwifery clinic.
Right.
So they would do water births. They're much slower, much more holistic. If you're pregnant, you go to your OBGYN physician, you get a 5-minute visit, and you're out of there, unless there's something unusual. If you go to a midwife, you get a 30-minute visit. the whole delivery is much calmer. You can do a water delivery, you can walk around, you can eat, you can do all sorts of things. You're not hooked up.
So you said water delivery?
Right.
Is this what we were calling Le Boyer birth at one point? Is that?
Yeah, right. And I know at the nurse midwives at St. Anthony's have a big tub that they use.
Really?
And some women just choose to labor and then deliver on dry land, and others prefer to deliver in the water.
And that, there's a tradition of that? That wasn't something that came out in the 70s or something?
I don't know how much the water delivery was a long time tradition, but certainly doing different positions. I mean, it was only when women only started giving birth on their lying on their backs when physicians took over and they wanted to be comfortable.
Yeah.
They wanted to be able to see, and it was not about, because that's not a natural position to deliver.
Well, so that's a good example of how public perceptions changed and maybe sent people in a direction that wasn't as good for them. Although obviously, if somebody's going to have a problem, they're better off in a hospital setting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So at one of my previous positions before I came to the university, I did public relations for St. Joseph Medical Center in Joliet, which is now Provena, I guess. And we put in we were one of the first hospitals to have a birthing center. And the room looked like a hotel room.
Right.
But if there was a problem, the walls turned around and things dropped out of the ceiling, and there were specialists there in seconds. But I remember doing the PR for it and getting the word out to the community that this is an alternative, and it might be a good way to do this. And then my wife had our first child there, and as soon as he was born, the nurses from the nursery ran in and grabbed him and threw him in the nursery. And I said, "Wait a second! I've been putting out press releases saying that the child can stay in the room with the parents." And the head of the nurses there said, "I don't read any of that stuff. There's babies going in here." And I felt like I'd been misleading people all this time. But I think the medical profession itself, right, and the people who came through that traditionally are the people who are most skeptical about these alternative methods, aren't they?
Right, they are. And that's because they don't know much about it.
Yeah.
Even though the World Health Organization said in 2008 that all medical education should include things on complementary and alternative therapies, we haven't done it in this country. Nursing is farther ahead than physicians, I think, in terms of Western medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, we went to another hospital in Chicago and had midwives deliver the next three. But of course, we were hedging our bets. We were still in a hospital.
Oh, sure. I think that's really appropriate, because if something goes wrong, you want to be in a hospital or a center.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, what impact do you think that has today? If maybe there's some alternative therapy that would be good for someone, but do you think maybe people are still afraid to look into these things because of the reputation that's been established?
I don't think consumers are afraid, because 2/3 of Americans use at least one form of alternative therapies. So I don't think consumers are afraid, and I think the response in this country is growing because of runaway healthcare costs, and also because of the adverse effects of medications and misuse of medications, so that more and more people are using more complementary and alternative therapies.
Yeah. Okay, and one of the when I think of the medical profession being skeptical about these things, one of the impressions I get from television is I remember on Star Trek, Dr. McCoy, every time, he'd travel into the past occasionally, right? And he'd say, "Oh, that was so barbaric," and he'd pull out this little box that he had, and he'd click it, and it would diagnose somebody and heal their, he'd wave it over them, and they'd be healed and all that. And I think that was kind of a manifestation of this expectation somehow that science was going to lead us to these new solutions to all of our problems, and that we could kind of forget about all of these things that were handed down from our ancestors. But it seems as though actually Star Trek was not representing the direction we were headed in, because about that time was when, in America at least, we started looking at all these things.
Right.
And so this is your fourth edition. Your first edition came out when?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah, it's been
it's been a while.
It's been, you know, I imagine 10 years or so. Yeah.
Yeah, probably about 8 to 10 years ago. Yeah.
So do you find that people are more accepting of the things you're talking about now? Have you noticed a change?
Yes, and we teach a course in our School of Nursing on complementary and alternative therapies. It's a required course, and the students love it because it opens them up to new ways of thinking outside of the box, and then they can help people explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do they say to you? You know, what kind of comments do you get from the students when you expose them to these things?
Oh, they love it because it's patient. It's what nursing wanted to be, which is being a healer.
Yeah.
And just learning new things.
As opposed to just being the doctor's assistant, right? Hand me this, hand me that.
Right.
Right. Do you have some former students who have really gone in that direction more than anything else?
Yeah, I can remember one student who had terrible migraines every single day. She'd been to every headache clinic in the Midwest, and nobody could do anything. She was on a whole lot of medications. And when she took this course, and when the Chinese acupuncturists were there, she decided to explore that, and she went for acupuncture. Within a week, she was down to fewer headaches, and by the time she finished, she was taking no medications, had no headaches, and she went on to the school in Chicago, the 4-year school in Chinese medicine.
Did she really?
Yes, she did.
So she's practicing in that area now, I
yes.
assume that. That's an interesting story. What about skeptical? Do you have students who are saying, wait a second, I'm at Purdue Engineering University here. What are you talking about? Do you get that?
A little bit, but I try and bring the evidence. You know, we look at the research, bring what the best evidence is, and show them that there's a lot of research out there on these. It may not be the same research that Western medicine is using. Sometimes it is, but it's hard to do randomized controlled studies when you're individualizing the care.
So are there people in the medical profession who do research, who contribute to our understanding of these things?
Yes, the National Institutes of Health has a whole big section on alternative and complementary medicine. Dr. Andrew Weil is probably the best known physician in this country looking at integrative medicine, which is combining Western medicine or biomedicine and alternative therapies.
And how do we identify those things that really are outside, that really are not recommended? I imagine there's still some things that we say are obviously...
Sure, because there's no research on some of them, you know, like color therapy or reading your irises. There's probably not much to support that.
Right, okay, good. Well, so we'll take a break here and we'll be right back. Thank you.
When it comes to college, you get the best of both worlds at Purdue, Calumet, and Hammond. You'll pursue a Purdue degree, and you'll do it gaining experience for a lifetime. Purdue Calumet is one of the nation's few schools to require real-world experience in all bachelor's degree programs. So you'll graduate with a Purdue degree, plus rich experience to list on your resume. And you can live on campus in apartment comfort. Phone 1-800-HI-PURDUE, 1-800-HI-PURDUE.
Welcome back to Calumet Perspectives. I'm here with Karen Fontaine talking about the fourth edition of her book, Complementary and Alternative Therapies, and how the perception of alternative healthcare in the news media and in our culture impacts people's choices when they're looking for help. let's talk a little bit about the Chinese tradition, which is actually much older than our tradition, right? Can you give us a
Yeah, the first medical book on Chinese medicine is 5,000 years old, where it talks about herbs and what herbs to use for different diseases. They spent a lot of time looking and studying people. And we just sort of in Western medicine ignored all of that, particularly in the United States, until President Nixon went over to China. I think he was the first president to go over to China.
He was, yes.
Yeah, and one of his aides got appendicitis and had to have his appendix taken out in China, and instead of a general anesthesia, what they used was acupuncture.
And I remember something about this, and it was interesting because it was something that would not have made its way into the mainstream media, but because of who was involved and the attention that it was getting, all of a sudden everybody was talking about acupuncture, right? Yeah.
Right, that was the first breakthrough, I think, for acupuncture.
And so what happened? So we had this problem, and they took him to a Chinese hospital? Yes, okay.
Right. And so things that the Chinese described 5,000 years ago, like the flow of energy, which is called the Meridians, where they use for acupuncture, we couldn't measure it. So we said, oh, of course they don't exist. You know, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist, which means that you never had brain waves until an EEG machine wasn't invented. Right. But now we can measure them, and you know what? They're right where the Chinese said they were 5,000 years ago. So
they might have known what they were talking about. So here's this American. It was an aide to the president, and they operate on him, and they don't give him
general anesthesia, right? Or a local. They use acupuncture
they stick a couple
for anesthesia,
pins in it, right?
And it worked. And I mean, that just stunned everybody in the West.
Yeah, that's a great story. Now on another topic, we were saying that in the late 19th century there was kind of a campaign to discredit non-medical, biomedical forms of healthcare. But in the 1980s, we had sort of a change in the rules for the professions, and doctors and lawyers for the first time started advertising, and hospitals started advertising, which has been a big boon to the advertising industry and to the public relations field. But I happen to have been working at a medical center when this happened, and there's a lot of research being done on how to do this. And the conclusion that we came to, we did some of our own research, and the conclusion that everybody was coming to is that if you want to market the services of the doctor, you don't do it by showing pictures of sick people, you do it by showing pictures of healthy people. And so healthcare kind of went off in that direction, and that's pretty much the direction they've gone in. If you see billboards today, you see healthy people, enjoying their lives, and the message is enthematically, right, that with the right care, you can be this healthy person enjoying yourself. But it seemed to me that a lot of times the alternative healthcare practices, when they advertise, they don't get that point. And I think in particular the podiatrist who will show, a drawing of a foot, a very unattractive drawing of a foot, right, with bunions and things, all over it, and little arrows and writing around it and things like that. To what extent do you think that's contributed to the problem, the lack of sophistication, I guess?
It's interesting that you say that they show healthy people, because by and large, our healthcare system is not a healthcare system; it's a sick care system. We don't really stress health. We're getting into disease prevention, but that's only one part of a healthy life.
Right.
We don't do much in terms of, we also want people to optimally develop physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, environmentally.
Right.
That's healthcare.
Right.
So we do very well in trauma, surgery, and acute disorders, but 80% of the disorders in this country are chronic. And we don't do very well with chronic disorders. Right. So it's interesting that they would use healthy people when their focus really is on sick people.
It was very deceptive of us, wasn't it? Yeah. But is there a difference then? I mean, would you say that there's more of a healthcare focus than a sick care focus with these other
Absolutely.
options here?
We're
Yeah.
always looking at people getting them in balance. We trust that the body knows how to heal itself often. If we can help support those healing processes.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it seems to me, you know, from a standpoint of kind of rhetorical theory here, that the argument that underlies a lot of this is that the body can't take care of itself. The implication of a lot of the rhetoric on healthcare in this country is the assumption that you need this little box that Dr. McCoy has
Right.
if you want to be okay again.
Right.
And well, I'm sure that's true if you've been in a car accident and your bones are broken.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Yeah, if I'm in a car accident, please do take me to the emergency room.
Yeah.
But after you've got me stabilized, then I want to use some of the alternative therapies in terms of helping my body heal.
Right. Yeah, because you know, yeah, and you mentioned the herbal therapies
Right.
that would have been used for so long. Essentially, isn't that the same as, in a general sense, it's sort of the same as what we're trying to do with pharmaceuticals, except the pharmaceuticals are much more processed and refined.
Right.
And
But they all came out of herbs to begin
Yeah.
with, and now many are artificial. But
Yeah.
we overuse medications. We
Right.
give antibiotics for viruses, and so now we've got mutant genes,
Yeah.
mutant virus, bacteria, excuse me.
yeah, I remember
So-
they were talking about that in the 80s, that, oh,
Yeah.
you know, we're breeding
And if
these
you've got hypertension
things, yeah.
and you go to a Western doctor, they're going to give you a pill.
Yeah.
And then when your hypertension
And then you can have
gets
some French
worse, they're
fries on
going to
your way
add
home,
another
yeah.
pill. And pretty soon
Yeah.
you're taking 4 pills rather
Yeah.
than getting some acupuncture, massage therapy, meditate, walk,
Yeah.
exercise. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so getting back to the advertising side of this. So after I worked at this hospital, I was hired by a podiatrist to do an ad for him, and he was one of these guys that had the drawing of the
Yeah.
foot, right? So I came up with this concept of a child who had drawn a hopscotch on the sidewalk, and this professional woman had come walking by and handed the kid her briefcase and was skipping down the hopscotch while the kid was sitting there looking like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great ad. I thought it really spelled out what the medical profession had already been doing for a few years, and he used it for about 6 months and went back to the diagram. Yeah, so I wonder if it isn't somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. I mean, do you think that maybe sometimes even the people who understand the value of the alternative medicines just expect to be kind of outside the accepted norms and.
Well, that's probably why they don't tell their primary health care providers what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're not telling about the herbs that they take or that they're going to acupuncture, they're getting massages.
Yeah.
And I think because people are so afraid of what their doctors are going to say about that.
Yeah. And who is the most skeptical about alternative healthcare? Is it the doctors themselves? Is it the general public?
Oh, I think it's the doctors themselves because there are so many people of the general public using alternative therapies. And part of that's about power and control and money.
Yeah.
Comes down to that. It's a bit of
Yeah.
a cynical view, but
Well, no, I mean, that's true, and that's where, that's where the public relations field and, managing the news media comes into it, and there's a huge disparity there. I don't know, anything about the either side of this argument, but I know that if you look at the discussion that pops up every now and then about autism, you hear from parents of autistic children who say, really, my child didn't show any symptoms of this until after the vaccination.
and all that's been refuted. Yeah.
But it has been refuted. But I think about this from a public relations media standpoint. The best funded charity in the world is the vaccination fund,
Yeah.
right? And so you've got an army of PR people and medical professionals who are drawing their incomes from this. And every time someone, a parent maybe, raises this issue, it's one voice. And the response is this worldwide network of people who have something at stake here, making a counter argument, which doesn't mean that they're wrong, but I think it points out the imbalance in the debate because, the average person can't afford to hire a PR team.
True.
by an ad in the New York
Right.
Times, right? Do you think that's the case to some extent with some of these other issues? I mean, what are people most critical of right now?
What are the medical people most critical
Yeah,
of?
yeah.
Oh.
Everything?
No, they'll buy chiropractic now, they'll buy acupuncture now because the National Institutes of Health have approved all of those and
Yeah.
said they're mainline therapies.
Yeah.
I think they're more skeptical of the mind-body kinds of things. They understand meditation, that decreases the stress response.
Yeah.
Animal-assisted therapy, for example, Porter Hospital has 13 dogs that come in, and a local hospital here won't
Yeah.
let dogs in the door. So, they're just because of all sorts of reasons. I
Right,
think. So
right.
it
Yeah.
just varies.
I remember we let somebody see their dog when I was working for a hospital.
Yeah.
And, it's like we closed all the doors, didn't want anybody to see it.
See it, right.
Snuck the dog up there. It was kind of interesting. Where are we headed in the future here? You think we're going to get to a point where people just see this as a lot of options that may be appropriate in certain situations?
I hope so, and I think it's going certainly in that direction. One I'd like to give an example of that nobody knows very much about is music thanatology.
Okay.
And we happen to have 2 music thanatologists in the Chicago area. The rest of them are all on the east or the west coast. And what music thanatology is, it came out of the thanatology is Thanos is the personification of a peaceful death in Greek mythology.
Yeah, Thanatos, right? Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And so music thanatology, it's a real program. It's use of harp music and sometimes voice in a prescriptive way for people who have a terminal diagnosis who are actively dying.
Yeah.
So it's not for distraction, it's not for entertainment. So it's creating this sacred space for people who are transitioning from life to death. It is so wonderfully peaceful.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful gift to give somebody who's dying rather than having them hooked up to machines and beeping and bopping and all of
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, interesting that it's harp music.
Yeah.
It's not electric guitar, for instance.
No, because harp is very, very soothing. And it's not music that you're familiar with. It's all based on what the harpist, the thanatologist sees and
Yeah.
changes according to how they're breathing, et cetera.
Right. Okay. Well, I might want the electric guitar, but I'm not at that point yet, I hope so. Okay, well, I want to thank my guest, Karen Fontaine. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and thank you for watching.